What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 670. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from the United Kingdom, filling in for Luis Scott-Vargas, who is moving this week, so he needed the week off. It's Sierkovitz. Welcome back, Sierko. It's always great to have you back on the show. How are things in the UK?
I see that you're carefully avoiding calling my region Wales this time. That's a very smart move. That's a very smart move.
Cornwall.
As always, it's great to be here. I promised to my Twitter followers that I will post a picture of me and LSV in the same picture so that you can believe that we do exist as separate beings, because recently we've been managing to record without hearing each other in person.
Well, he doesn't like you. So
he only pretends. He tries hard to get so that I have heard more.
He likes you. It's just that he keeps having things pop up in real life that he has to go take care of, and you're just the perfect person to have on, because we like to have you on for one time per set cycle anyway. So when he says, "Hey, I need next week off," I go, "I'll ask Sierko."
Exactly. I mean, it's good that I can remove some workload from you, because I know that you have probably way too much of that. So that's fine. Everyone is happy.
Yeah, I really do love having you on. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
This set is dope.
Yes, it is.
I'm pretty sure you agree. I mean, it's been a while, and there are reasons for why it's dope, but it is dope. And yeah.
Potential all-timer here. We're going to go over a bunch of stuff with Sierko today on the podcast. We're going to talk about his first look at the data for Dominaria United to get Sierko's take on it from a data perspective. We're going to talk about something that we talked about last time we had him on, but we're going to go a little deeper on and maybe a little bit of a different look, which is ALSA and how it relates to games in hand win rate. ALSA is average last seen in a pack. So what that lets us do is kind of make an interesting comparison to how well a card does in actuality versus how well or how often we take it and how high we take it. You'd think there would be a pretty big correlation, but sometimes there can be gaps there that we can take advantage of as limited players. And then we're also going to talk about Sierko, you had me on this article you wrote for MTGA Zone. Database heuristics for MTG arena drafts. I was like, get me in there. That's all I ever want right there. That's the perfect marriage for me of something that I talk about a lot on the podcast, which is we have all this data now. And one of the reasons I love to have you on is to help us translate that data, not just from interesting facts or, something that is, I didn't know that before, but what can I do with it? How can I take advantage of it while I'm actually sitting at the table? And this is an article that does just that. It actually puts forth a couple of heuristics, shortcuts, if you will, that will allow you to take advantage of some of the extra information we have from the data. So we're going to go over all of that, plus Crack a Pack and everything else in this week's episode of LR. Before we do, let's talk about our sponsors. First up, TCG Player. Make sure you check them out for really everything in their marketplace. Man, if you go to the TCG Player marketplace, it is huge. You can find pretty much anything you need there. And since it is a marketplace, that means that multiple shops, in fact, tons of shops, can all sell together on the marketplace. And, this is a similar thing to what CFB had as well. It's just scaled up. It's been around for a lot longer and it's a lot bigger. And that is a big advantage to you, the consumer, because it allows you to comparison shop. It allows you to say, what is the best price, or what is the fastest shipping, or what is the condition that I want, or, narrow it down to get exactly what you'd like. And since these shops are all on one big marketplace, they're competing against each other. If they put up a card for $5 and the next person comes along and puts it up for $4.50, who do you think is going to sell first? So it forces them to get the prices to what the market can actually bear the quickest. And that benefits you, the consumer, because it means the prices will be lower. So make sure you check them out. I've got a link in the show notes for our affiliate link for them. If you click on that, anything you purchase after that, and just the fact that you've even visited their site, will let them know that you heard about it through us here on LR. It helps out the show, and we really appreciate it if you would do so. Also, the show's brought to you by FTX. That's FTX within the United States, which is where I am right now, or ftx.com, which is outside the United States, which is where Sierkovitz is, for example, in the whole wide world. And there's of course an app that accompanying app for your phone that you can use as well. This is a place to manage all of your digital assets. It's also been expanding out to manage non-digital assets as well, such as stocks and such like that. You can check it out to see if that's available where you're at. But it is a marketplace, right? This is a place where people go to buy, sell, and trade things. In this case, most of the things are digital assets, but as I said, it even has started to expand beyond that. And this is a safe, regulated, trusted place to go to do so. And, in a wild world, especially a new one like the world of blockchain, that can be very valuable to know that this is a company that is going to stand behind their product and that you can trust is going to do the right thing with regards to regulations and stuff like that. We can't recommend them highly enough. If you want to try out this world of digital assets and the like, you want to make sure that you educate yourself first. This is, I would tell you this no matter what, right? You have to know what you're doing first. You don't want to just jump into things that cost actual money and carry actual risk and start spamming around to see what happens. You wouldn't do it in Magic and you wouldn't do it here either. So make sure you consult a professional of some sort to make sure that you understand the ups, downs, and in-betweens of how this all works. But when you're ready, boom, they're ready for you. FTX.com outside the United States, FTX.us within. We thank them for their support of the show. The show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. If you sign up, you get a thank you card and an LR sticker in the mail, no matter what level, and you get access to the Patreon feed, no matter what level. Then as you go up, you can get access to an uncut version of the show. For example, Sierkovitz and I just had a discussion about the Magic 30th anniversary products that came out before the show, so you could hear that. Luis and I'll probably talk about it on the show next week as well. Don't fret. But yeah, so you can get a bunch of cool stuff like that. You also get access to the live feed of this show. We do a recording that gets broadcast to an unlisted link on YouTube, and you can watch us get ready for the show and record the show in a live stream format. The cool part about that too is that since it does go to YouTube, it also, the link stays, even if you weren't able to get there exactly when we were live, you can watch it later if you'd like. And it'll stay up on the Patreon. That link is there and you can watch it whenever you want. So you can see us prepping. You can see us talking about what we're going to talk about on the show, what we're not. We'll joke around. Nonsense ensues with producer Jeff, Luis, and I, Sierkovitz when he's here, etc. So anyway, that's all on the Patreon. And the last thing you get, no matter what level you're at, is you get access to the Patreon question of the week thread. This one comes from Luigi Sartro, who says, "Hi, Sierkovitz and Marshall. Any advice about the ratio of spells to creatures in the blue-red deck in Dominaria draft?" So the first part, I want to start one thing here, Sierkovitz, to see if your experience reflects this as well. But I do view the blue-red deck as falling into two broad categories that often overlap a fair bit. But one of them is the Tolarian Terror version that we talked about on the podcast last week, which is the shorthand version of saying the more controlling version that wants to fill up the graveyard with instants and sorceries and cast Tolarian Terrors using cheap counter spells like Essence Scatter and cheap removal spells like Lightning Strike to keep the opponent's board clear and then mop it up with 5/5s. Then the other side is the more tempo aggro version of it that's looking to take advantage of the 1/2 that gets +1/+1 counter that I can't remember the name of, and the Gitu amplifier and Balmor, to kind of put a lot of pressure and have a big turn finish where you end up piling on 20 something damage in one huge attack. And these decks play out a little differently, and they have different wants. So first up, do you see that deck that way as well?
So this might be related to my inability to play tempo decks in this particular format, but I've drafted things that I thought would be like amazing versions of the aggressive spells. So, a couple of Balmors, a couple of the infantry things, a bunch of spells, lots of reactive stuff. And I drafted, I think, 2 or 3 of those decks, and with 2 of them I went 0-3. And, it's a small sample size, but every single game it was like I managed to bring my opponent down to 2, and I ran out of steam and got overrun with the big things. So what happened next is I tried to make a hybrid strategy of what you described, where I focus on this early interaction. I still have my 2 drops. I still want to have my Balmors, my infantries, my 2-drop creatures, a lot of cheap spells. But because I have a lot of cheap spells, I can easily play those Tolarian terrors as well in this format. But because I have a bit of a top end, and I especially like 2 cards in this deck as a top end, Tolarian Terror, which is obviously great because you drop it late and you have a counter spell backup or shore up backup and it survives and you can do that last couple of pieces of damage. And, Balmor is also good with Tolarian Terror because a 6/5 ward to trample is better than a 5/5 ward 2. And the second creature I like there is Maria's Outrider. And then I put like a couple of on-color duels that also have another type. And I basically can use them as a sort of like a 5 mana, deal 4 to face, create a nice creature that also has reach and will do some damage. Because I think that goes back to the question of the from the Discord. You want to have many spells in that format. And because you want to have many spells, you can have only fewer creatures. And if you have fewer creatures, make sure they count. So, yes, you want some early things that can deal early damage and you can sort of play this tempo game. But if that plan doesn't work, like in my aggressive decks that the plan didn't work, you want to have a plan B, and Tolarian Terror is a very good plan B. Mirror Outrider is a perfect creature that can deal those last couple of points of damage without having to push through a 6/4 or 4/6, for example.
I think maybe one way to frame this, and we'll answer the question in a minute, but I think this is an important discussion about a real archetype in the format. I think that one way to frame this as well would be, instead of doing it the way that I did, which is to say, pick a creature that's kind of the headliner or a headliner for the strategy. It's almost the opposite of that. So an example would be, in the slower version of the deck, like I would never run the Figment. I can't remember what it's called, but the 2/1 that can get unblockable, right? Like that is not where I want to be. No, I don't, I want Essence Scatters and Lightning Strikes and, answers to things, even like you said, cheap cantrips, that type of stuff. I don't want a random 2/1, maybe even unblockable in that deck. But in the other version, I will run it. It's still not a priority, but it's a card that I'm like, I'll put that out on turn 2 and kind of make them answer it, because it will be unblockable. A lot of times it'll get him for 6 damage on its own, or it can finish up a game late, like you said, where you get him to 2, and then you have that thing out, and you just draw any instant or sorcery, and boom, you get to kill them. That to me is kind of the dividing line. Are those type of cards? Like, do you want to run this in this deck, right? And because it's a very clear no when I'm running the mostly counters, burn spells, bounce spells, and Tolarian Terrors version on a card like that. And on other versions, it's sure, I can run it. So what about, like, I'll go first, but roughly speaking, you can definitely run fewer creatures in either version, to be honest, but certainly in the slower version. I think I've run as few as 6 or 7 creatures in that deck before. I don't think that's necessary. I would guess the sweet spot would be somewhere around 8, 9, or 10, because you do need to make a lot of room for the cantrips and for the reactive spells. You need to have critical mass of instants and sorceries. It's that simple. One thing that does pop up, though, pretty frequently that I found is that you can definitely run fewer than 17 lands. You can run 16. I haven't run 15, but I could see a world where I did if I had enough timely interferences and stuff like that. The more you cantrip, the more your land to spell ratio goes in favor of lands, and you can flood out. There are numerous ways to help prevent that in the set, so it's not a major problem, and you can often just run 17. But I think one thing that people get a little hung up on is, let's say you have like a really nice draft and you get 3 Tolarian Terrors, right? You're like, okay, my end game is fantastic. When you lay those out, it looks like you have a big top end just at a snapshot to your brain visually, like on Arena, but those usually will cost you 1, 2, or 3 mana in the deck. It's somewhere in that range when you actually start deploying those that they usually have around that cost. So if you move those over, a lot of times, like Ameria's Outriders, your most expensive card, and you might have one or two of those. And a lot of time, it's really heavily at 4. And if that's the case and you're cantripping all the time, you can definitely get away with running 16 as well. So that gives you an extra slot for an extra cantrip or something. But as far as creatures go, yeah, 9 is kind of what I aim for. What about you?
I'm just frantically looking through my versions of those decks just to count how many I put in real life. And I looked through 4 decks, and I had 9, 9, 10, 10. So there you have
Bingo!
9.5 creatures is the number. However, in one of them, I sort of half cheated because I played this big version of the deck, and I had 1 white creature, and that was a 4-mana wall that was white. I put like a small wall package into there.
I've through my powers of deduction, I figured out what you had going on in there.
Yeah, but that package was enabled. I picked it late in pack 3 because I picked like very late wall tutor guy, and I picked a couple of the 05 walls because I wanted to play 17 lands, but I didn't want to flat, so I put a couple of those 05 walls so I can rummage my loot my land.
And that's one of the ways you can get through, and there's multiples. All right. So yeah, think in the 9 to 10 range there, Luigi. Thanks so much for the question as well.
And I think if I would go lower than that, I would definitely want to have some shore ups in my deck.
You would?
Yeah, because if I have fewer creatures, every creature becomes a removal target because there will be decks that will have as many removal as I have creatures. So in order for them to survive, I want to have a couple of shore-ups or one or two shore-ups to protect whatever I have. Okay. Because especially blue-red, you don't have that much recursion from the graveyard. So you want to sometimes protect your Tolarian Terror.
Yeah, and I mean, shore-up's a good card in the deck anyway, right? So you're not sad about having to play it. All right, let's do a Crack-a-Pack here. Curious to get your take on the Crack-a-Pack as well, Sierkovitz, as this is always a good time to kind of check in with you. We're going to get your take on the format when we talk about your initial look at the data for it as well. So we'll kind of split that up between this and that. But this is always a nice little snapshot of kind of where you're at. First card off is Toxic Abomination, which is also an accurate description of how I see the card. It is horrible.
Make that joke, damn it.
Sorry. It's horrible.
Yeah, no. I think it's not horrible, but it just aligns very badly with what Black wants to do in this format. I think that there would be formats where this would be a good card.
Okay, sure. But here it's bad. I mean, if somebody plays it, I'm like, oh, thank God. Next card up. Hey, we just talked about it. Tolarian Terror. So that's an easy one to zero in on here early. Good finisher for that deck. Though it is worth noting, Luis mentioned this before too, I have definitely seen people play this without giving much thought. They're just like, oh, it's a good card, I'll take it. I'm sure I have a few instants and sorceries, but sometimes they actually have very few instants and sorceries, and this thing when it on average costs 5 or 6 is very medium. It is really not exciting. You need to get it down into like at least 4 before it starts to become interesting, and then 3 or below is like thumbs up, you're doing it. But keep that in mind. This does not go into every deck. It actually does need a little bit of support, and if you fully support it, it's amazing. Then it's one of the better cards.
Mm-hmm. I've seen, I've asked some people because they had the 2 blue mana 2/3 that allows you to draw an extra card every turn. And I asked them, if you have enough instant or sorceries, does Tolarian Terror still cost only 1 mana despite the 2 mana extra that you pay for it? And instantly someone sent like a screenshot of that situation, and Tolarian Terror still costed 1 mana, which means that they have enough instants to support them. Yeah.
So if you have 8 or more instants or sorceries, you can still get it down?
Yeah.
Oh, incredible. I didn't know
and
that.
That looks sweet. And that's how I want to play Tolarian Terror. I want to play it for 1 mana or 2 mana, and then I'm happy.
That's great. Captain's Call is next. That's a 3 and a white sorcery that makes 3 1/1s.
Yeah, I think it's a disappointing card. I was thinking it will be more important because I was thinking maybe before the format was released that green-white is going to be a thing, and it's not.
Agreed. Vanquisher's Axe. Wow, this card's been bad. It's the 1-mana equipment.
I mean, the dream still lives on to play the red saga and the red-green rare that can tap an artifact to draw cards, but...
Yeah, and then
let's start by not first picking it.
Yeah, then there's also the what is he? Is it the red white legend that no? What is it? There's one that it's
I think you're talking about the red green 3/3 that basically you can tap an artifact to give you mana or tap 2 exile.
I know
card,
that one. I was talking about Danitha. The ground, it has this extra text that it's just I don't know, whatever. And there's some other card that cares about equipment that's in red, white too. But at any rate, no. Next, Extinguish the Light. That's the 2 black removal spell. So there's a really good one too. This is a good pack so far.
Yeah, I mean, so basically Tolarian Terror and Extinguish the Light are the cards that I hold close enough that I want to see the whole pack decide which one I pick, because I will make that pick based on what I think is more likely to wheel. And so I basically want to pick 2 cards over one. If I see something that will most likely wheel with Tolarian Terror that's a good instant or sorcery, I'm happy to pick Tolarian Terror. If I see something, because Extinguish the Light, I probably want either in a grindy black-white or in domain deck of some sorts, but the kind of good stuff domain. I want to see something that will fit in that deck and will likely wheel for me to pick. Yeah.
Okay, but that's 2 good close ones. Next card, good card, Talus Lookout. This is the 2 blue 3/2 flyer that gets you a card when it dies.
It is a good card. I would still pick Terror over it initially.
Same.
Later in the draft, I might pick Lookout over Terror if I think I'm more like a Skies version that doesn't have the right kind of spells for Tolarian Terror. Because you have to keep in mind, Terror is good with spells, but you also want to cast your spells early, and there are some spells in this format that you don't want to cast early, and then you probably want to play Talus Lookouts over Tolarian Terrors as your threats because they are just better then.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the mana consideration, double blue versus single and that whole thing. Next card up. Wow. This is a great pack. Citizen's Arrest. So that's the arrest variant.
The Wingmantle Chaplain removal squad. I think the card is very interesting. I wouldn't pick it as a first pick. I think this is a good reason to play a more streamlined 2-color red-white aggro thing because you will have more access to Citizen's Arrest.
Yeah, the double mana pips really stand out in this set. When you're trying to oftentimes play 3, 4, sometimes 5 colors. Cards like Citizen's Arrest that are just straight up 1-for-1s, good ones. It's a solid card. You want that card if you can cast it, but the if you can cast it comes up more often than I think we'd like. Next is Broken Wings.
Don't take these Broken Wings.
Yeah, don't learn to fly. Wow, this pack is insane. Our last comment is Lightning Strike. We got Citizen's Arrest, Lightning Strike, and Extinguish the Light all in the same pack.
So I can tell you, Lightning Strike, out of these cards that we've seen so far, has one big advantage. It's a good card. It has a good win rate, but also is the card that is you're most likely to play as your first pick. Because it's, I think, the common that most frequently ends up in your deck when you pick it. And that's a good advantage to know, because it means that you are likely to play it if you pick it. So for now, this is my pick because I can put it in a blue-red, I can put it in the domain deck, I can put it in my white-red aggressive deck. It goes into all of those shells quite easily. It's very universal. So that's why I would pick it over all of these cards.
Yeah, and it makes sense when you look, right? Tolarian Terror, to be really good, needs to be built around. Extinguish the Light is double black, and Citizen's Arrest is double white. Talus Lookout's double blue, right? So you have a single color, cheap card that is effective at killing 1, 2, 3, and even sometimes 4 mana creatures. Yeah, that seems really good. I think I would probably be on Strike or Extinguish at this point, but it's close. Uncommons. First one up is Garna, Blood Fist of Kell. This is the 1 black, red, 4/3. And this is the one that says whenever a creature you control dies, you draw a card if it was attacking. But if it wasn't attacking, then this thing deals 1 damage to each opponent.
So I think that the answer to the question, would I pick it, is in you describing what it does. Would you describe a Mythic Uncommon at the week 4 of the format? No.
No.
People know what they're doing. The fact that you have to read it, what it does, means it's not. And it's not the fault of the card, because I think the card is decent. I think that the fault is that Black-Red didn't come together as an archetype. I just think that, Black wants to do grindy, slow things, and Red is pretty aggressive. And when you mix those together, it just doesn't work very well. I've lost to some good Black-Red decks. They do come together rarely, but you probably don't want to pick a Red-Black Uncommon early. You want to see them maybe pick 7, then you pick them, and maybe you see that they're open, maybe you'll get there.
And this describes a lot of the double pip with a single cycle. These are the type of cards that you're better off getting later if possible. And we'll actually talk about that in a little bit later. Next uncommon is Protect the Negotiators. This is a 1 in blue instant, and it has kicker for white. If you kick it, you get a 1/1 soldier, and it counters target spell unless the controller pays 1 for each creature you control.
It's an excellent card. I wouldn't first pick it ever. This is the card that would break the tie for me for between Tolarian Terror and Extinguish the Light. I think that there is a good chance of this card wheeling. It wheels quite frequently, and it has a really impressive win rate, as most counter spells in this format do. This is a counter spell format secretly. So if I would not be up for the Lightning Strike, this would be the thing that I would probably pick Tolarian Terror over Extinguish the Light.
This next card, can I interest you in some card advantage, and more card advantage? It's Sprouting Goblin. This is the 1 in a red 2/2 with kicker for green. If you kick it, you can go get a land card with a basic land type, even the duels in this set, and put it into your hand. And it also has activated ability of red, tap, sack a land, draw a card. And this card's been great. 3 mana, you get a 2/2 plus a land. And then if it just sits there, games definitely go long. The domain decks definitely end up with redundant lands on the battlefield that they can't use. And being able to cash those in, for a card. I mean, I've seen people activate this 3-4 times over the course of a game. Even in the sense, even if you have, let's say you top out at 7 mana, you've got your 7 mana, just you draw a land, play it, pay 1 red, sack it, and get a new card out of the deal. Even that's just great.
No, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Maybe you want to keep 7 mana on board. But Sprouting Goblin is my pick for now of all these cards. I think it's flexible enough. It does put me into certain path, and that path is vaguely domain. I still don't know if it's aggressive domain or it's this sort of like controlling domain. But I think it's better enough from Lightning Strike that I would be tempted to pick it.
Yeah, agreed. This would be my pick as well. But boy, these are some great ones. And it's going to take a lot to get me to not pick Sprouting Goblin. For example, Herd Migration. This is the card I want to open the most in the format, period. I love this card. 6 and a green. Here's the funny part. It's a sorcery. And it says, create a 3/3 green beast creature token for each basic land type among lands you control. So in the decks that it goes in, it usually makes 4 or 5 beast tokens. Hilariously, there's a whole other line of text that I under no circumstance will ever use, which is 1 and a green, and you discard it. You search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle, and you gain 3 life. I would rather take a lightning strike to the head when I'm at 3 than cycle this thing away. I'm not doing it. It's either getting cast or I'm going down with the ship, because if I have to just put this game ender into the graveyard, like I'm off it, I'd rather concede.
I do understand, but I did cycle it twice already in this format.
Oh, so, shame. We need to walk you through the town square.
I chose to win games over style. It hurt.
But you have to sleep at night, Sierko. Like, you have to put your head down on that pillow and be cool with who you are. How could you do that just for a game win?
I go to sleep at 3 and I close my eyes. At 4, my cat starts waking me up. Then the dog wakes up. Then the child wakes up. Then I have to go to work.
Regardless of whether you cycled or not.
Those kind of things.
Yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. But I would take this card. I absolutely love it. I found it to be very difficult to beat, very powerful, and one of the few non-kicker payoffs that are actually worth it at 7 or more, which again, if you're going to run some of the ramp spells and stuff, you actually can get yourself up to 7 mana, pretty quickly in the format, and the format's generally not so fast that you can't. Every time somebody casts this against me, I'm like, well, that's a big problem. And every time I cast it, I feel like, I'm in really good shape. And it's also just a single green. And jokes aside, that activated ability is really powerful. Also being basically uncounterable instant speed, and then the life gain can even be relevant. It's 3 life. It's a lot. Like, they didn't just tack on like you gain a life. Like, you're actually gaining a significant amount there too. So I love Herd Migration. Might be one of my favorite cards in this set. I would take it here. Would you take it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like, look, this is the third card with the highest game in hand win rate among the top players in Arena.
Is it really?
I like to think of myself that I belong to that category. At least I aspire to belong to that category. And because of that, I'm going to pick it because I think that it will have a good win rate in my hands.
I like it.
It's also one of those weird cards that gain win rate as between the bottom win rate players and top win rate players. So it raises the rank. So it requires some skill in playing, but the results are there.
So I did not mention something. We do actually have a foil rare here as well.
Yeah, just you can skip it.
It will not sway you.
if it's a multicolor rare, it's probably not worth picking in this format.
Yeah, isn't that insane? That is actually a useful heuristic, and it applies here. It's Sten Paranoid Partisan, which is the 2 mana 2/2 that you can blink, and it makes certain things cheaper. But not a card that I care about at all.
I mean, it might be an interesting addition to your white-blue tempo deck if you pick it late, and that's where you should hope to pick it.
Yeah.
I mean, luckily you won't have those kind of choices on Arena because there are no foil rares there.
Right. Exactly. On Arena, doesn't apply anyway, but for us, it doesn't apply anyway because we would not be playing this card regardless. Okay, so let's get into our main discussion here, Sierko. First up, you had a chance to have like kind of a first look at the data coming out of Dominaria United. And you wrote an article about it. You are writing for MTGA Zone, which I'll put a link to this article as well as the other article that we're going to use as kind of a guide for our discussion here about the heuristics. Those will both be in the show notes as well. What did you find?
So I started looking at the very basic premises of the set because I think that the design of it was driven by a completely different principles than the last 10 sets. Because I think that last 10 or so sets, I think one of the problems with them was that they felt a bit samey. They felt like they come from this mold that you basically insert some card ideas and they spit out the numbers and they generate the cards. They tweak a bit, but in the end, there are no major differences between them. And this set felt very different from the beginning, mainly because there was not of this 2-color paradigm, like in most sets, where signposts and commons are defining what you want to be doing in the particular deck. Some of those signposts were showing the direction of what you want to be doing, but lots of them were actually a supplementary function. And the main definition of the format was those 5 common creatures that have a lower cost for something. And it was defined by single colors rather by the color pairs. So what I did is I looked at multiple sets. So basically going back to Zendika Rising, I think, I think I went back to Zendika Rising, and I looked at what was the percentage of decks with different number of colors played by the 17 lens users.
Okay.
And I basically, first of all, I found that there is like 2 main categories of the sets when it comes to 2-color decks. And in sets like AFR, Crimson Vow, Midnight Hunt, Zendika Rising, these are like strictly 2-color sets. Like 80% of all the decks that people played were 2 colors and nothing. And then 95% of the decks were two colors, or two colors with splash. So, like you get like 15% on top of that 80% of decks that splashed something. So they had like up to 3 cards of another color.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was like a collection of other sets, like the Alchemy Horizons, Kamigawa, Strixhaven, and Kaldheim, where roughly 50-60% of the decks were pure two colors. And then you had like 20-25% of two colors and splash. So splashing was more predominant in those sets, but still 90-80% of the decks were two colors or two colors with splash. And then there was Streets of New Capenna, which only had 15% of two-color decks and only 35% or so of the two colors or two colors with splash. So 20% of the two colors with splash decks.
That's a huge outlier then.
That's a huge outlier, but you have to keep in mind that Streets of New Capenna was designed to be a three-color set, and people played it as the three-color set.
Okay.
Weirdly, still the two-color combinations were stronger, but they didn't come together so often because there were so many multicolor cards in there that it was very hard to build a coherent two-color deck.
Okay.
And then we have Dominaria United, which has 20% of two-color decks, but it has like a massive, like 37% of the decks are two colors with a splash, at least in the early format. It might have changed in the recent weeks, but if it changed, it probably changed to be more multicolored than it was. So
wow,
DMU does not fit to any of those previous sets because it's not a two-color format. It has more splashing than any other set in terms of two-color decks. It has basically the same amount of pure two-color decks as a three-color format that Streets of New Capenna was.
Right.
So I looked at other levels of that, and I looked at what percentage of the decks were three colors.
Okay.
And at Streets of New Capenna, there was a clear outlier. 55% of the decks were pure three colors.
Wow.
And there's still like an extra 10% that were three colors and splash. Okay. But it's interesting to see that majority of the three colors deck in Streets of New Capenna were pure three color and there was not splashing. So you really wanted to stick to this three color combination because that's where all the synergy was. And adding stuff from outside of the synergy was not so important. So probably you only added for some like super powerful cards that were outside of your color combinations. And then there was Kaldheim and Strixhaven, which had roughly 20% of three color decks in some combination. And, keep in mind, Kaldheim had a lot of those multicolor snow decks, and that's probably why you see them. And actually, Kaldheim had like 50% of the three-color decks were pure and 50% of the three-color decks were splashing. And then all the other sets, Kamigawa, Baldur's Gate, Midnight Hunt, Zendikar Rising, Crimson Vow, and AFR, they had under 10% of all the decks were three colors. And we get Dominaria United, which is roughly 20% three-color decks and the other 20% three colors and splash. So 40% of the decks roughly were three-colored. Not as much as in Streets of New Capenna, but not far behind.
And far more than any of the other two-color sets.
But double of what Kaldheim or Strixhaven had. Yeah.
So
quadruple of what Kamigawa had, for example.
So the incentives had been laid out in SNC to be three-color, and people went with them. Yeah. All the sets that we were talking about, the other ones, Kaldheim, blah, 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 mostly two-color. And even though theoretically Dominaria isn't forcing you to be three-color, four-color, or anything like that, people are doing multicolored stuff. Now, one question I do have here, Sierkovitz, though, is is Tolarian Geyser a two-color card or a one-color card?
Now, that's a good question. According to 17 Land's data, it is a two-color card. And that's important to understand it. But in order for it to be a part of multicolor set, you also need to have a white source of mana in your deck. And if you put a white source of mana in your deck, you're definitely planning to cast it kicked. So
okay. So both of those things have to be true.
So basically, yeah, exactly. Just putting Tolarian Geyser in your red-blue deck doesn't mean that you're splashing white. You need to also have a white source in your mana base in order for that.
Okay, I understand.
Let me come back to one last thing. because of course I went to the 3-color decks, but there are decks that have more than 3 colors. And I looked at the data related to those. And there we also see like Kaldheim and Streets of New Capenna were the outliers. They had 3% of decks that had 4 or more colors in any combination. Then it was Strixhaven with 1%. And then it was like all the other sets. Like I think in AFR, which was the weirdest one, there was one deck in 5,000, I think, had more than 4 colors.
Wow. Not just like, not even more people just got bored and tried something stupid and what? That's crazy.
No. But there was just so little fixing in there and so little motivation to do that. Now we go to Dominaria, and 6.5% of the decks are 4 colors or more. That's doubled in Streets of New Capenna, doubled in Kaldheim. So it does support multicolor decks the best from any other format. And it's not only, we're not only talking about people playing it, because, people can do crazy things, and maybe they do it not for their own good. I also calculated the penalty that you get for playing multicolor decks. And for example, in a set like Midnight Hunt, playing a 4-color deck gave you a 20 percentage point penalty to your win rate.
20
percentage points.
Oh my God.
So if your average win rate was 56, your win rate with 4-color decks was like 36.
That's a disaster.
That is a disaster.
It's horrible.
And in every format, like Baldur's Gate, Midnight Hunt, Crimson Vow, AFR, and Zendikar Rising, you see that every addition of a color or a splash is a decrease in your win rate. Okay. And you basically go down and down and down. I think that 5-color decks in Crimson Vow, you got 22 percentage point penalty in win rate.
So every color you add accrues a bigger penalty. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like 3-color decks in those formats were roughly like 5 to 8 percentage points penalty for your win rate.
Okay.
That's a lot because, of course, adding extra colors puts a strain on your mana base. You will have situations when you cannot cast something, and because you cannot cast something, you're basically playing with a mulligan because you have the dead card in your hand that you cannot play. You're going to finish the game with that card that you cannot play, and the more you splash, the more likely this is to happen.
Right, of course.
And obviously, you put powerful cards for a splash, but the power of the splashed card does not overcome this penalty for having bad mana base and not being able to cast things.
Okay.
But then there's other 5 sets, and that's in particular Strixhaven, Kaldheim, Kamigawa, and DMU, where the penalty is much, much smaller. So, for example, in Strixhaven, it was roughly like 2 to 3 percentage point penalty for playing 4-color decks compared to playing 2-color decks, compared to the average win rate in the format. In Kaldheim, weirdly, like 5-color decks were having actually a highest win rate of all the decks, but that's slightly because.
Wait. Do you mean Sorry, do you mean the lowest penalty or actually highest?
No, it's actually 5-color decks were the highest win rate in.
Like they won more than 2-color decks.
Yeah.
Oh, that's weird.
But that's a bit of a quirk in the data because in the beginning of the format, Snow was so open that you can just basically drop.
Yeah.
I spent beginning of Kaldheim just putting my Snow mana base and picking all the strong cards that no one was interested in because people didn't know what was strong yet, and winning a lot of games through that. But still, for playing 4-color decks, you have under 5 percentage points of penalty. And the same in Kamigawa, playing 5-color decks, you had maybe like 4 percentage point penalty. That's nowhere close to those 20 percentage points that we talked about in the previous. And also, it's relatively flat. So you have a slight penalty for putting more colors, but it stays relatively flat.
Okay.
Streets of New Capenna was a weird one because it also had this increasing penalty for putting extra colors. It's just that there was no penalty for playing 3 colors, but playing 3 and a splash was already penalized. Playing 4 was penalized. Playing 5 colors was like already like 8 percentage points lower win rate than.
I see.
So basically, Streets of New Capenna was exactly like the 2-color sets. Only the optimal number of colors to play was 3, and because of that, there was no penalty for playing 3 colors. But it was not a multicolor set, while DMU basically has almost no penalty for playing multicolor. It's like playing 5 colors is below 2 percentage points of a win rate penalty, which is not much.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
It's
so
the
this is
flattest
basically
of these.
Yeah. So this is basically the summary of why this set is so different. It allows you any strategy from a strict 2-color deck in some color combinations, like white-red. I want to play 2-color white-red all the time. It's a great deck. It's very coherent. It has a solid plan. I want to play the blue-red tempo decks all the time because I can make a very coherent deck. But if I want to, I can play Green Domain, I can play Esper Walls, and all of those things are viable, and I don't feel that I am disadvantaged by playing 3-color decks versus people that are playing 2-color decks. In many cases, I feel I'm privileged to play a 5-color deck because I have so much extra power by having this Domain 5 on occasions.
I see. One way I think that we can sort of express this as well is the difference between the worst performing combination, whether it's 3-color with a splash, 4-color with a splash, 5-color, 2-color with a splash, or 2-color, and the best, right? So like if we look at the difference, like I'm looking at the first group of 5 that you mentioned, and like just going through them, it's like something around 11% difference from the very best to the worst. Going to like mid, it's looks like it's about 21%. For Vow, it's even higher. It looks like it's about 23, 24%. For AFR, it's about 11%. And for Zendikar Rising, it's around 20% different. So like if you take, the best performing
the spread,
combination, right, and then the absolute worst that you could find, right, and then like going to SNC, it's still somewhere around 7 or 8% spread. If you look at DMU, it's like 2 or 3.
Yeah, maybe 4 if you stretch it.
4?
Because but it's
total.
it's also like it's only mainly driven by the fact that there is a couple of good 2-color combinations and people mainly play those, and they have high win rate because of course the consistency of playing 2 colors is something.
Right, but that's incredible to be able to say what's the best combination. How greedy or how wide should you push your mana or whatever, and you can say that every single combination from 2 colors to 2-color with a splash, all the way up to 4 colors with a splash and 5 colors exists within a 4% band. It means you can do any of them, right? They're all viable.
And also keep in mind that the 4 and plus color decks were played more than 2 times more frequently than the second closest set, which means that those 5-color decks are not something that happens once in a blue moon. These are things that routinely come together.
That is really cool. Yeah. And I mean, it's starting to explain a lot about why I love the format too, right? I mean, one of the hallmarks of formats that I really love and something that we've talked about on the show before is that when I'm in the middle of a draft or halfway through pack 1 and getting into pack 2, that I still don't know 100% exactly where this is going, and that's okay. Right? The formats that make you commit to a pick and hold on for the ride are not that enjoyable to draft. I mean, I'm talking about the draft portion. The gameplay varies, independently in many ways. But during the draft, I want to feel like I have some agency. I want to feel like I can change my mind. I want to feel like I can read a signal and go down that road rather than the one that I was on, and actually come out with a deck at the end that I can make work. And this is at least some nudge that this format, gives me that.
That's actually very fine that you mentioned this part because it's not in the article, but I did also test that. And DMU is also a set with the lowest first pick play rate. So
is it really?
Of the last 10 sets or so. But I tested it for the recent sets, and basically all of them are almost spot on 80% of the first pick you play. And nothing goes much below that 80% threshold. And DMU has 75-ish% of a first pick play rate. So basically, if you pick a card, you play it 75% of the times, while in the other sets, it's 80% of the time that you will end up with playing your first pick. Interesting.
That's great. Okay, so that's a really cool overview to give us some context about if you're enjoying it, why, and maybe even if you're not, why. Like maybe you prefer a draft format that has you more on rails, where like you first pick a gold card and you kind of just hang on for the ride, and that suits you better. But this can help tell us why. Now, one of the things that we talked about before when we've had you on the show, but I wanted to kind of revisit a little bit and touch on before we get into the database heuristics, are I look for value, right? And what I mean by value when I'm looking at 17 land stuff, what I'm really looking for is kind of interesting. It reminds me of the movie Moneyball, which is a great movie, by the way. It's one of my favorites, and it's definitely worth checking out if you haven't. But, it chronicles this story of the Oakland Athletics baseball team in the early 2000s trying to adopt a data-driven approach to how they run their team, mainly following the general manager. A general manager in baseball and in many sports is the person who's in charge of assembling the roster. They're the one who pick which players they want from the drafts. They all, which is similar to Magic drafts where, you can pick whoever you want. And then, at a certain slot. And then also who to pay, right? Like if a player comes up and it's like, well, we have this much money, most professional sports operate under, at least in the States, I don't think soccer does this, but operate under a salary cap.
No, they don't. No. But
yeah.
Soccer does quite the opposite.
It's the opposite, yeah. They operate under a salary cap, which means that each team has a certain amount that they can spend on their players for each season and have allotted to those players. So that means that the general manager, and this is who it followed in the movie, has to decide, well, who am I going to give the money to? Well, the approach that they took was interesting because I think most people think that they figured out how to see who the best players were better than other people. And that's not actually true. They may have done that as well, but what they were really looking for was a gap. And the gap was the public or known perception of a player versus what they actually brought to the table as far as helping you win games of baseball. And for a variety of reasons, people can layer their own biases or not be fully informed about what actually informs baseball wins or Magic wins in our case. And it's not just about saying, hey, this is the best common in the format. That is useful. And, you can get information from 17 lands that approximates that. But if we're going to go deeper as a drafter, what I really want to know is what's the best card that people aren't drafting highly enough, because that's where I can actually make up the ground. The fact that this information is publicly available means people who care, our listeners, your readers, they already know which cards are good or not. They can look at on 17 lands, they can read your articles, they can listen to this podcast, and they can figure that out. But what I want to know is what card does everybody thinks isn't very good, but actually affects your win rate? So the way that I've been trying to approximate this, but I really want you to help me with this and to understand it, is trying to come up with some type of correlation between ALSA, which is average last seen at, in the pack, basically the number of pick at which this goes, and how to correlate that with games in hand win rate, which is our best approximation for how, quote, good a card is, how well it performs. Because those should be relatively in lockstep, right? Like, let's say we take a card like Lightning Strike or a well-known removal spell that sees heavy play, performs well and everything. Once it starts winning, we can see that expressed in games in hand win rate, right? We can say, hey, look, it's winning at 60% or whatever. It's a really good common. And as anecdotally as I play, and I play a 4-drop and they kill it with their Lightning Strike, I go, wow, that was good. And then I draft it myself and I can get my opponent down to 3 and I kill them with it, or I kill their blocker and attack. Oh, that was really good, right? And I go, man, Lightning Strike's good, right? Okay, so we have consensus. Lightning Strike's good in this format. It's a good card. You want to play it. But that is only the first step for me as somebody who's trying to take advantage of this data. Because then if I were to look, I should see average last seen at for Lightning Strike be quite high, meaning people don't pass it. They take it very highly. They may take a bomb over it. There may be a couple of other commons that are in contention, but it is not going to make it past, say, pick 4. Pick 5, pick 3, right? Somewhere in that range. So how I can't garner advantage from it beyond recognizing that card's good. And I want to take the next step. And I want to say, what if there's a card that I can look up the games in hand win rate and it's pretty good? Maybe not Lightning Strike, but it's doing well. It's like, wow, that card's really good. But then if I link it up with the ALSA, I see that the ALSA is lower than I would expect that's the type of card that I want to zero in on, because that's where I can actually get ahead of the field if they're not aware of that. Can you help me marry those two things? Are they related? And how would you do this so that I can get the information that I want, which is to help find these types of, little golden nuggets?
Okay, we can try one better. Getting the cards is relatively easy. I would recommend you basically you can copy paste the table with from 17 Lens that has the card ratings. You just need to go to analytics and card ratings. You have the table of all the cards in the format. You copy it. You can sort it in whatever thing you're using for your data and your Excel or whatnot. Just take all the cards that have an ALSA, let's say 6. 6 is pretty decent because it means the card goes relatively late. You will see it very frequently wheeling, for example, if you take when you take that. I have to look at my helper table and to tell you what percentage of the time will the card wheel. If it has ALSA of 6, it will roughly wheel 50% of the time when you open it. 50% is good. 50% is good enough for you because, very often you will make those kind of value calls if you open a pack and you have a choice between 2 picks, and that potential wheeling card will be your tiebreaker. That's where you get that value. So you can make the cutoff, look at all the cards that have an ALSA of 6 or higher number than 6. And then you can sort them by the game in hand win rate and look at the cards that are there. And if you do that currently with the Dominaria United, the top value card is Shield Wall Sentinel. That's the 1/3 colorless wall that tutors for another wall. That has a win rate of 61.2%. Why? Well, because it tutors for the Winged Mental Chaplain most of the time.
Yeah.
So it's a special case, and it's a very big outlier. But if you look a bit down the list, you will see several interesting cards. You have Phyrexian Espionage and Impulse next to each other at 58 and a bit, roughly 58.5% win rate. And they have ALSA of 6 and 6.3. So you'll get those easily. You have Clockwork Drawbridge, which has a 58% win rate. That's, again, thanks to Winged Mental Chaplain. So everything that is a wall, you have to take a look that it comes from a particular context. Then you have like Gaia's Might and Shore Up. They also go quite late. They have around 58% game and hand win rate. Shadow Prophecy, that's the black draw spell, the sort of dig through time for domain.
Yeah.
Again, 57%. And just to finish it off, the cards that I think are worth looking, Airtight Scorn, Eerie Soul Tender, Colossal Growth, and let's say Crystal Grotto. These are all over 56.5% win rate, and they are going after picks. They have ALSA over 6, which means that they will wheel 50% of the time roughly when you open them in your pack. Now, there are 3 categories of cards in the group that I mentioned. And first is walls. Let's not focus on those because this is very specific for Dominaria United because Winged Mental Chaplain is such an oppressive card. And on the other hand, Shield Wall Sentinel is a really bad card if you don't have the Winged Mental Chaplain. Right. So you will wheel it because you really want to have the Winged Mental Chaplain before you start doing something with it. However, important part is that you can always speculate on opening late Winged Mental Chaplain and pick those Shield Wall Sentinels when you don't have much to pick for your deck. So, for example, every draft, when I have a choice of like very medium replacement card or Shield Wall Sentinel, I'm picking Shield Wall Sentinel because if I get the Winged Mental Chaplain, I might have a prime common in my deck thanks to how it works with Winged Mental Chaplain. So I'm speculating on those quite heavily. Second category are combat tricks, and this is something that you will see across multiple formats. So it's a sort of like a soft heuristic before we start moving to the actual heuristic topic. But you see Gaia's Might, you see Shore Up in this thing, you see Colossal Growth. There is a good reason for that. In most decks, you don't want to have multiple combat tricks.
Right.
because because that's you just don't. However, there are some decks, and they are present in this format, like red-green domain or red-green aggro with some elements of domain, where I played. I think my last trophy deck had 3 Colossal Growth, 1 Gaia's Might, and 2 Take Up the Shields in it as combat tricks, and it trophied 7-1 no problem. So you can really load up on combat tricks in this format in some versions of the decks that you're going to play. And I can do that because I know that combat tricks in general are going to go quite late in the draft, so I can prioritize the creatures that work well with combat tricks, and I know that I'm going to wield those combat tricks and I'm going to get a deck.
Right, that makes sense.
So, yeah. And third general category, and it's not apparent from when you look at the data, but if you play around a bit with 17 lands and you look at the win rates of the cards played by the top 17 land users in terms of win rate, and maybe the lower tiers of the win rate users, these are the cards that behave much better in the hands of top players than other groups. And I'm talking here about, in particular, Phyrexian Espionage, Impulse, and Eerie Soul Tender and Airtight Scorn. Lots of those cards have a massively higher win rate when played by the top users.
Interesting.
I think that Airtight Scorn is I have that data. I just need to sort it nicely. Top minus bottom. Okay, let's look at that. I think that, for example, Negate is one of the cards that has the highest delta between top and bottom group of users. But if you go a bit lower, you will also find Impulse, you will also find Phyrexian Espionage, and you will also find Airtight Scorn. And there is like a 20 percentage points difference between the win rate of top users and the bottom users, when the average is closer to 10 percentage points difference. So it's quite a big difference there.
And when you see that, does that usually mean, like, what do you guess that difference is? Like, just that top players understand contextually when to cast it, or is it like when they put it in their deck? Or
several things. I think that with a card like Negate, I think top players put Negate because Negate answers a particular types of threats, and they are going to stick to that Negate and wait for that particular threat. And I'm talking about cards like Heroic Reinforcements, for example, because you can play like a control deck and you can control the board nicely, and then they have like 3/1/1 soldier tokens left behind. They swing with them and play a Heroic Reinforcement, put trample on something, and all your like building, stabilizing the board is gone for nothing. Right. However, if you can counter that Heroic Reinforcements, you eradicate their board because you can make the good blocks, because you know that the heroic, well, it's not Heroic Reinforcement, sorry, Heroic Charge, the give +2/+1 to all the team and trample if you kicked it. You can completely ruin their plan, and they never come back from that situation because you held that Negate.
I see.
But I think that maybe a less experienced player will be happy that, first of all, might not play Negate because they don't realize that Negate is actually not so bad in this format. And even if they play it, they might see one target for it, and they say they might be happy to actually have a target for it and then counter something. While the plan with playing with the card is to be more patient and target really those super important things like
Urborg Repossession.
Urborg Repossession, that's the one that you that I was thinking about, because this thing is just putting you so much behind, right? Especially when they return the Wing Metal Chaplain or something.
Right. One last clarification. Do you think that that's capturing when they choose to cast it, or does it also capture that they put it in a deck that they knew that Negate would fill a weakness?
Yes, it's both deck building and game plan. I mean, first of all, identifying the weakness is part of the plan already, and then playing with the card is the second part of the plan.
Right.
And that's one category. And I think that counter spells in this format are a good example. I think that they are played more frequently by the top win rate players. They identified that having counterspell in this format is not a bad idea. And like things like Ertai Scorn, which normally, rightfully so, would be put in the sort of like filler tier, are actually good because of the games being longer and because of this attrition kind of spell-based play is so important. You keep in mind that out of the top 10 commons in this format, I think that there is 1 wall, 2 actual creatures, and 7 spells. That's how important spells are in this format. And it comes sneakily because you still play with the creatures, but in the end, how the games are won and lost is dictated by the spells that you're playing.
Interesting.
And lots of people miss that. And there's one more category of the things that I think that make a big difference, and it's spells that give you a lot of choice. Because again, I think that more experienced players that played longer, they know what to choose in a particular moment. And I'm talking about things like Impulse. I'm talking about things like Shadow Prophecy. You see 5 cards, you have to pick 2. A more experienced player will make a better choice there more frequently, and it makes all the difference.
Okay, so we were talking just a minute ago about heuristics, right? Like, how can we gather these types of things, like these little deep dives that we do, the types of information we can get from the data, but actually translate that into an approach, right? A strategy, a thing to keep in mind, something that I can have in my head that isn't so down in the weeds with the data that I can't figure out how to apply it, but actually turn it into a heuristic that I can use it. And you wrote an article where you picked 2 of those and kind of laid them out for us in a really cool way. And the first one actually had to do with when you take fixing.
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't literally take them. I don't have a back catalog of heuristics. I did, and I'm hoarding them and,
you
and
have
not
2
releasing
right
them
now.
to the public. I found them. I basically found them, and I finally had enough data to sort of confirm them. Because, the problem with the data analysis and basically with the content production is that the right term? Content production? Should I use that?
Sure.
For limited, is that even when we look at the data, it's usually dictated by the current format. So we are in Dominaria, we talk about Dominaria. You invite me every set and we talk about that set. So there is rarely a moment when you can just like step back and look at the last 10 formats and try to do comparatives between formats and figure out the things.
Right.
And I do have a job and other life, family, pets.
Really cute dog. You got a cat.
Teammate.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Dog, cat, who steals my pizza.
His cat was literally stealing his pizza before we were recording.
Well, I was talking to him not to steal my pizza.
Yeah.
Like, zero respect. But those analyses take extra time because basically you don't need to run one analysis for one format. You need to do it for 10 and then aggregate them and then make some conclusions.
Right.
But because I've been doing it for some time, I've did some analyses for particular sets multiple times, and I sort of kept the files behind, and I managed to even find something in the mess that I left behind and start drawing conclusion. And I thought, look, I mean, enough is enough. Let's take a step back and let's look at comparative data from different sets. And one particular analysis that I already had like inklings of an idea of heuristics that are universal for most of the sets was looking at differences in ALSA. Luckily, we have introduced the topic of ALSA between pack 1 and pack 3. Mm-hmm. So basically, when you see ALSA on 17 lands, it's an aggregate for all the packs. And some time ago, I thought like, all right, but that's an aggregate. Maybe there are some cards that are differentially picked in pack 1 and in pack 3.
So just to clarify, by aggregate, you mean, so average last seen at could change whether it was pack 1, pick 1 or pack 3, pick 1 or going forward.
Yeah, exactly. So like a chance of wheeling a card in the first pack might be different than third pack. At least that was my premise when I first did this analysis. And I think that first time I did it was like ages ago in Kaldheim. And when I did it, I noticed that basically there is a big category of spells that go much later in pack 3 than in pack 1. And there is one big category when cards go much earlier in pack 3 compared to pack 1.
Uh-huh.
And these are two cards that operate on the same axis, but human psychology works in such a way that people prioritize the first cards early, and the second category of cards they don't prioritize early, and then later they desperately try to get them, and therefore they're picking it. And these two categories are signpost uncommons, so multicolors in general.
Uh-huh. So gold
and
uncommons.
Land fixing.
And fixing.
Guess which we prioritize early, and guess which one we procrastinate as long as possible to pick.
Yeah, everybody that's drafting has known that you get to pack 3 and you're desperate for fixing, right? I'll take it over anything. You're bargaining with the magic gods, right? Like, I don't care if it's the best mythic in the set. I'll just take this dual land so I can actually cast my spells.
And I've seen that so many times on the streams when the streamer tells, now we have to think about fixing, and they open the next pack and there's like a perfect land for their fixing, but it's like middle of the pack 2, and I say, yeah, but there is this 2-drop. We also need 2-drops, no? I mean, come on, chat. We do need 2-drops, and they just swiftly pick the 2-drop.
Maybe it'll wheel.
It's like, oh, where is my land?
Totally. And I think we've all been there before. But there is a logic to that, not outside of psychology, right?
Yeah, there is.
Okay, go ahead.
No. I mean, I know what your train of thought is there.
I mean, I'm thinking of it in terms of like, if you take the fixing first, you might not get the gold card later, and then you have fixing for nothing, versus if you take the card that you want and then try to fill in the fixing later, it does make some sense. I mean, I don't know. I there's definitely what you described happens. I've done it. I think most people have, where, we call it eating your vegetables, right? If I'm streaming and I know I need to take a land over some powerful spell because my deck's already going to be really good, if I can just cast my spells, I'll say I need to eat my vegetables. But that's hard to do. It's not fun, right? It feels like doing getting on the treadmill or something. It's like, this isn't really what I want to be doing, but the benefits are worth it, so I'll do it. And you take the land at some point. But I've also seen most people don't. Like, they just don't eat their vegetables,
So I think that there are sets where you probably want to ignore that. You should always know that wheeling your lands is going to be happening much less in pack 3 than in pack 1, because that's also happened. That will almost always happen. To give you the numbers, I looked at ALSA, but because ALSA is correlated with wheeling, I give the numbers as percentage chance of wheeling the land in pack 1, pack 2, and pack 3. For this set, for the 10 dual lands, you have 40 to 50% chance of wheeling the land in pack 1. Then in pack 2, it drops to 30 to 40 or 32 to 40% chance of wheeling. And in pack 3, it drops down to 35% chance of wheeling. So that's the, like, every pack you just have a lower chance, and it's across the board for every of the 10 dual lands. Basically.
This isn't a great commentary on humanity, is it? It's like everybody in pack 3 is just scrambling for these lands.
It is true. And you will see that kind of thing, because it was the same in Kaldheim, it was the same in Strixhaven with the Scry lands. There was always like a drop of, like, people wanted those lands much more, or they were fighting for them much more in pack 3. Now, if you're smart, you will pick your fixing in pack 1 because that's when it's available, and you put yourself in super good position. And especially when you put an extra pressure on those lands in the early packs, in pack 3, they will be fighting for the lands so heavily that you will get the rewards, and you will have the mana base to support, like, multiple colors. Now, this will not be a good strategy in every format by all means. Like, you don't want to do that in a format like Zendikar Rising when there is a penalty for playing multicolor decks. But in a format like Dominaria United, when actually 5-color decks are not a bad idea at all, pick this fixing early, and the reward will come. I could assure you that you will get those multicolor cards later, and I can assure you, because I also know the numbers, how later they go in pack 1 versus pack 3. And we go to those multicolor cards, and like, for example, let's say Balmor, yeah?
Yeah.
10% chance of wheeling it in pack 1.
Okay.
But 25% chance of wheeling it in pack 3.
Oh my God.
That's the difference we're talking about.
So it's a huge difference.
For some of them, there's a small difference, because like green ones especially, and the ones that are more expensive, people still take them because they're easier to splash, and green already naturally wants to be domain. But you still, you take like Botruk Bone Rattle, which is like super easy to splash and quite powerful when you have domain, and it's 7.5% chance of wheeling in pack 1 and like 11% chance in pack 3. So you get more of them, and because it's across the board, that's quite a lot of cards that you might see later. And it gets even better for the ones that have a double pip, like Tatyova. It goes from 8% to 15% in pack 1 versus pack 3. I want to pick a good one that you actually want to play. Erg Spawn of Turg, which is a great card, that wheels every single time, 34% of the time. Play this card more. It's a great card. Come on.
I like that card, yeah.
Yeah, me too. It's so good. But somehow arena users don't like it. And they also don't like Vohar, which is another great card. The looter that can rebuy you a spell.
Oh, I like that. I like that card a lot.
How important are spells in this format. But because this format supports 5-color decks, if you get the fixing early when no one wants fixing, you will get the multicolor spells that are powerful late when everyone is fighting for fixing. So
that's fantastic. See, this is where we can actually have a takeaway here, right? Of like, this is a strategic decision that you can make based on this data of saying, I want to take these lands and I know I'll get something later. Now, it is format specific, as Sierkovitz said. You can't just apply this across the board. I think that the most extreme example of this, and a good way to sort of set the signposts on the far end of it, would be Cube, right? Where there is absolutely a strategy where you can go for, pack 1 in many legacy or vintage cubes. And you could literally just say, I will take the land unless there is one of these cards on this list that are deemed unpassable by me for the entire first pack, right? And usually you'll open up a few of those really good cards. You end up with like 10 dual or tri lands going into the second pack. Then you will pick up a few more of those in that pack, but for half of the second pack and all of the third pack, you can pick whatever spell you want. And there's 2 reasons that you can do this. One is that you can play 5-color with that level of fixing. Not all formats support it. Dominaria does, and so does Cube. And 2, you are guaranteed to get powerful options if you're playing 5-color and Cube in the third pack. It is impossible for you to come away going, oh, I bricked, just didn't get anything. You will find powerful spells. Now, that will range from sometimes busted really insane to sometimes, this ended up pretty good. I could have been better. Dominaria is like a mini version of that, right? You are not guaranteed, but you are much more likely to get those powerful gold cards. And if you push it all the way out to 4 or 5 colors, the pool of cards that you can expect to open and see later than you would in pack 1 is actually big enough to support, focusing on sacrificing those picks early to get the lands and then getting the good stuff later.
And then there's one more small aspect to that. You also have mechanics that scale with broadening your mana base, like domain in particular. Like your Nail Avizoa is so much better when you have 5 lands than when you have 3 lands. Your herd migration is just linearly scaling with putting those extra lands. And if you have multiple of those effects, you're going to get a big push from them. And also late, if you are the one that uniquely positioned yourself as this multicolor deck, no one else will want to herd migration if they are playing a 2-color deck. No one wants to play 7 mana for 2 3/3s.
Right.
I think. And you're already there with your ready mana base. You're going to get those cards slightly later. And that's, of course, herd migration won't wheel. Just pick it, please. Yes. But
yes.
But you might get it pick 3 because no one was interested.
And go ahead.
Yeah. And it goes the same with all the Tatiovas and the multicolor cards. They still wheel like 15% of the time, but if they wheel 15% of the time, they will go to pick 5-6 quite frequently.
When you sit down, what does this look like for you? Like the application of this? Like, have you tried doing sort of the full-on version, or do you let it sort of shade your decisions here and there? What does it look like for you personally?
So I don't know if you remember, but when I was here during the Streets of New Capenna ages ago, when we did that episode, I was making an argument for Streets of New Capenna being a 3-colored format. Mm-hmm. And we didn't agree on that. But now I thought about why I was making this argument, and I looked at my drafting strategy in that format, and I was doing exactly this, but sort of intuitively. I knew that lands are going later in pack 1 because I analyzed previous formats. But in Streets of New Capenna, I very often started with like a card that was sort of like a reason to be in particular color combination, maybe 2 of them, and then I started like super highly picking fixing for that 3-color combination, and then packs 2 and 3 I was filling in from the cards that were going later and I was literally aiming at having 6 fixing lands in that format, because 6 fixing lands usually allowed me to make my mana base 9-8-7 or 8-8-8 or something like that, depending on what I needed. And I was very flexible about how much of each color I put. So I could go maybe I could go 9-9-6. And 9-9-6, that mana base, 9-9 is good for a 2-color deck.
Yeah.
So the splash is
almost
free for me. Yeah. But I could only achieve that because I forced this fixing early and then got rewarded in the later packs. And then you get like pick 4 in pack 3, you get this hostile takeover or something like that, and you feel like you're a mastermind. Although Corpse Upriser, because you get a perfect Grixis mana base ready to accommodate it, and no one else can play that card, which is super powerful because you got all the fixing early.
Yeah, I will say, just anecdotally, it's really fun to draft this way because you get a really big sweat. There's a lot of cards that you can open if you're, pushing your colors to 3, 4, 5 that are really great, and not just open to get past you. As we've talked about here, your likelihood of wheeling these type of cards does go up. And I think a lot of times by the time you get to pack 3, you're a little bit on cruise control, right? You kind of know your 2 colors, your 3 colors in most formats, and you're just sort of along for the ride because the major decisions have happened, and it's just did I get lucky and open some good stuff, or maybe there's a judgment call here or there, but for the most part, you kind of pick, and off you go. But when you draft this way, every pack that gets passed to you up until your wheel, so pack 3, pick 1 through pack 3, pick 8 is a major sweat, because even pick 7, pick 8, you can get like stuff that you would never see there in the first pack. But since people are locked into their colors, they're like, well, I can't cast it, so they'll pass it. And you can get it. And you're just like, oh my God. And it doesn't always work out that way. You are at the mercy of what cards get opened in the packs in a way that you aren't normally. But it is a fun way to draft. And like you said, you do feel like a mastermind when it works.
Yeah, but especially in the format like this that has that supports 5-color decks and also supports several flavors of those 5-color decks.
Yes.
You're not going to be like terribly disadvantaged by having all that fixing, because there's so many powerful cards nowadays in Limited.
Yeah.
Maybe you would end up with a perfect version of the Domain deck, but you might just end up with a very, very powerful version of like 5 colors good stuff.
Yeah.
And it's good to go 5-3. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, any other thoughts before we take off here, Sierkovitz? This is great stuff. This is my favorite part about data is the translation layer, from interesting pattern or thing that we didn't know before to, okay, but how can I win more, or how does this affect my strategy?
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind that by communicating this heuristic, I made it less useful instantly. I think that LSV said that once. We still remember LSV as part of that podcast. He said that every time you communicate a heuristic like that to a wide audience, you make it slightly weaker because people will act opposite to what they did before because they learned something. So I guess I ruined it a bit by sharing it with the wide audience, but I think it's interesting to know. And I think that despite your best efforts, Marshall, still not every person in the world is listening to LR.
No.
So maybe will get weaker. Maybe we can even measure that at some stage, but it still should work. And as we know, even knowing those things doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden going to start prioritizing your fixing, because that's just not in human nature, as the heuristic shows. So
that's right. And like we said before, it's eating your vegetables. You're supposed to eat. We've all known that since we were a kid. It doesn't mean we go home and cook up a big batch of broccoli every night and start eating it, right? It's hard to actually do the thing. But knowing that it's there and that you should, air quotes, do it, or that it's an option strategically, or it's a consideration, definitely is an advantage over not knowing. And that's the most you can do, right? From our seat, is to inform. If people want to follow these heuristics, they can.
Marshall, I think you will agree that what we can do in this situation says, do as we say, not as we do.
Yeah, exactly.
And now let's pick this splashy 3-color card without any fixing and hope for the best impact free.
Yeah, exactly. That's I'm going to do that right after we're done recording. I just know it. All right. Well, let's call it a show there. Sierkovitz, where can people find you? Where can they find your articles and your seminars, and what have you been up to, et cetera? Go ahead and let them know.
It's been pretty busy. We started a new semester at the university. You have to keep in mind, I still do my research and teach at the university as a side job from my content creation. But I've been churning those seminars out. That's fine. That's all good. They're still, you can find them as a podcast as Magic Numbers. You can find them on YouTube as Sierkovitz. You can find weekly, I try to write an article for the mtgazone.com where I describe what I found in my seminars, and I try to put it a bit more accessible, sort of like 5-minute reads to sum it up. And I'm obviously on Twitter, where I just write stupid jokes and include some maybe links to some small data snippets. So it's like a Sierkovitz light version, I guess, all under the same name. So so feel free to find out how it's spelled from the description of the episode. Which is important, because I've seen that last week I've seen that there was someone literally using my nickname but switching a couple of letters, pretending to be me, that was trying to scam people.
No!
I was both. It is a sort of a compliment, because it means that my
welcome. You made it. Yeah.
But then I reported them, and they no longer exist. So hopefully that's done. What I also wanted to say is that my content creation is in massive part dependent on 17 lands being there, because I think that, I could still give my opinions, but my opinions maybe are not as interesting as the data analysis that I do. So if you can give any kind of support to 17 lands, I'm going to be very happy, because one of the reasons why I come in here is to be a sort of like unofficial PR person for the 17 lands brand, and get people to use them, but also get people to support them, because those things cost. Data storage, data aggregation does not happen magically. So if you can give the guys a bit of support, that would be awesome. Okay, yeah, and again, these links will be in the show notes as well for Sierkovitz's Twitter and both of the articles that we talked about. If you want to look at the graphs that he made. Especially if you bring him up alongside when he was talking, you can see that as well. And then I'll put a link to 17lands.com as well in the show notes, and you can find their Patreon on their website, and also just all the data and everything on the site as well. We always really look up to them, for having done this. They have ushered in a totally different era of limited strategy that I didn't think we'd ever get to see. And it's really awesome. And and like you said, support them if you can. It's definitely worth it. I mean, I would never have made any content in my life if I was not inspired by 17 lands.
Yeah.
I mean, this was the only exclusive reason why I started doing any content creation, is because I looked at those numbers and I'm like, wow, this is a whole new world that they opened for me, and it's amazing.
It really is. And your skill set of being able to understand and take this data, translate it for us, is invaluable. We really appreciate you coming on the show, Sierkovitz. Look forward to when you come back as well. We want to say
I
thanks.
frantically checked now the word invaluable in the dictionary. I hope it's the right meaning then.
It's what you hoped. Yeah. I want to thank our sponsors. Once again, that would be TCG Player as well as FTX for supporting the show. We really do appreciate it. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Sierkovitz is Sierkovitz basically everywhere. Again, there will be a link to Sierko's Twitter in the show notes there as well. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. That's all the episodes of the show ever. There's also a YouTube channel for the show if you want to watch the video versions of it. You can see the crack of packs and that type of stuff. You can see us talking. Hi, everybody on YouTube. And once again, the show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. I want to say thank you so much to everybody who supports us on Patreon. It really does mean the world to us. That's going to do it for this one. We will see you next week. Okay, Sierko, I'm going to put you on the spot. This is a food-based sign-off, and as is tradition. What are the 3 best foods of all time?
3 best foods of all time.
The 3 best. You can choose to interpret that however you would like. It can be your favorite, or you can say, whatever, pizzas are the best because everybody eats them, or whatever. It's up to you.
Yeah, so I have to think quickly. I'll just make.
Oh yeah, this is on the spot, foods. By the way.
I'll make top foods in 3 different categories for me.
Beautiful.
Okay. Category number 1, gourmet.
Okay.
And I think that for that I will pick some kind of a good version of a duck breast, because I do love a well-rendered duck breast with a nice crisp, with a bit of a pink in the inside, with maybe like some kind of honey and thyme Provençal kind of glazing, maybe with lavender even. Add some taties on the side. It can be like a classical French a meat and 3 veg. I'm happy with that. If the duck is cooked perfectly, add a good. Can you talk about wine here? Yes.
Yeah.
Add a nice glass of good red wine, and I'm happy. This is my bucket. This is my like death row. When Lewis finally annoys me too much, and I go on the death row somewhere in Colorado, that's what I would require for my last meal. That's your
last meal? Okay, all right.
Yeah, give me French kitchen duck breast probably. I'm going to be happy.
So that's gourmet.
In the category comfort home food, like a good plate of simple tomato sauce pasta, but like make it a good tomato sauce. Don't save on pasta. That's like mistake number 1. Buy a good brand. If you want my recommendation, they are well known. Just ask me in private. I don't want to advertise something without being paid. You know me, all about monetization.
Yeah, that's
don't save on tomatoes. Buy good tomatoes, and don't save on time. Not thyme. Make your sauce long. Let it simmer. Let it bite through. And like a good tomato pasta at home is just like perfect comfort food for me. And in category street food, I'm going to be very patriotic today. I'm going to call zapiekanka, which is a Polish street food. Like back in the communist times, it was like the thing that you were buying from this very unhygienic street vans. But when I'm thinking about it, it's like a perfect moment for this particular type of food to be eaten, because it's vegetarian. It's like basically like a baguette cut in half, and you make this mushroom paste. So onions, herbs, pepper, and mushrooms. You can. I'm pretty sure that if you would think about it, you can make it from a very gourmet version with porcini to a basic with just champignons. You fry this mushroom paste for some time so that they soften nicely, and you spread it on the baguette. You put cheese on top, and then you basically grill it so that the cheese melts nicely, and you warm it up and you crisp it up. And then whatever condiments you choose, you can put some pickles. You can just put ketchup and mayonnaise if you're like into simple. You can add the crunchy onion on top. And it's like amazingly satisfying street food that is unknown outside of Poland, I think.
I've never heard of this.
if anyone wants to run them, I already have a name for them because they're called zapiekanka, which means baked thing in Polish. But zapiekanka is maybe not good. It starts with a Z. You can call them zappies or zappies or something like that. Just sell them. They're amazing. Do some research. I think that this is the street food of the future.
Great.